I want to talk briefly about the history of the OECD, what it is and why we exist at all. We were basically founded as an outgrowth of the Marshall Plan. Does everybody here know what the Marshall Plan was? I was always taught. George Marshall gave a speech at Harvard in 1948 where he basically was advocating that we need to spend this money to redevelop Europe. And the United States is the biggest member of the OECD. It is an international governmental organization. You can think of it as the economic NATO. That is to say, we are established by a treaty or convention, and we are a membership organization. It's harder to get into the OECD than the WTO. We're a little bit perhaps more demanding. Maybe not everybody wants to join the OECD. I'm not sure that China really wants to join the OECD, but we have a special relationship now with China and India and Brazil called enhanced engagement, because these economies are so important in the world that if we weren't working with them, I think our relevance as an institution would suffer. The OECD.org site is what we call the public site. We've got something like 200 webmasters working throughout the organization. We have 2,400 people in our secretariat in Paris. We currently have 33 member countries, and these are the member countries. And if you scroll down here, you'll also see that Estonia will be joining very soon, and the Russian Federation is also in what this process called accession. Accession to the OECD means that you are agreeing to abide by the conventions of the OECD. So one of the big accomplishments of the OECD has been something called the Model Tax Convention. And the easiest way to remember this is, and there's lots of details about it, but think about double taxation. Pretend you are a rock star or an international golfer or tennis player, and you're earning money from countries all over the world. Where do you report that income? To which government do you pay taxes on that income? And so the tax convention is a series of agreements so that governments know how they're going to treat this kind of income. Well, obviously it's not just for international sports stars. Think of all the multinational corporations that there are that are doing business in all these different tax jurisdictions. So just on the basis of that international tax work alone, the OECD has a reason to exist, so that all these countries can come together and talk in a setting that it's not the UN. We do not get involved in defense. So for example, one of our big programs is called PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. And you may sometimes hear or read in the news, the United States came in 27th in math or something like that. Where are they getting these numbers? We have a program that tests students from 57 different countries. Now, right away, if you're paying attention, you say, well, wait a minute, you only have 33 members. How come you? Our mission is to help economies grow. And education is one of the most important components. And so we have actually quite a lot of data. And if you look at what's going on in the United States with this current recession, you will see that the people with college degrees are faring much better than those without. In fact, I think in Washington, D.C., which is the city in the United States where people have the most number of advanced degrees, the highest percentage of people with advanced degrees, the figures are quite staggering. If you have a college degree or some form of tertiary education, the unemployment rate is only about 5%. But if you are a high school dropout in that cohort, the unemployment rate is 20%. And in non-OECD countries, and we've been able to identify a whole bunch of different variables that impact whether or not, does a woman have the right to own property? Do people get to choose who they marry? Are they allowed to get education and so forth? And once again, we have very strong data now showing that to the extent that women are allowed to be educated and to own businesses and to inherit property, the whole economy benefits from it. What the OECD, the role that the OECD is currently playing in the world is to bring numbers to the policy debate. And there's some good news and bad news in our data. I mean, the bad news is that in a number of the countries in Europe that are our members, we have third generation immigrants who have not sort of caught up, who are not assimilating and not doing well. And it's, creating a lot of social and political problems. We are a hub for global dialogue, a source of creative solutions, and a standard setter defining best practice. So that model tax convention is one of the standards that we set, but we also have standards on all kinds of things you wouldn't expect, like fish, fruits and vegetables, guidelines for testing chemicals. Think about international trade and think about the kinds of standards that countries need. If you want to import, let's say L'Oreal is doing a new hair color product and they want to export it around the world. Every country that they would export it to would have to have its own standard to say, is this product biodegradable, for example, to satisfy their environmental laws. So the OECD has a whole collection of standards called the Guidelines of Testing of Chemicals, and these international companies use them. They actually work. There's a council, and the council is made up of ambassadors. Every member country sends an ambassador. It is a presidential appointment. Our current ambassador is a woman named Karen Kornblue, who was appointed by President Obama, and she's I think she went to college in, I'm trying to remember, in Pennsylvania, and then she went to graduate school at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. And the council decides what are the big areas of work that we're going to undertake. So for example, in recent years, we did a lot of work on water from a global perspective. We're doing a lot of work on climate change. We have a book coming out called Cities and Climate Change that is the culmination of that work that really tries to put a dollar amounts on what's going to happen to these major cities in the world if the sea levels rise 3 feet. How do we work? So committees are, as I said before, we have over 200 committees, and they are made up of people from the departments and ministries of our member government. So the Education Committee is going to have people from the Department of Education. The Labor Committee is going to have people from the Department of Labor and the Ministry of Labor in France and the UK and so on. But there's an awful lot of people coming in and out, and they might work at the OECD for 2 years and then work at the World Bank and then come back and work on another project at the OECD. So there's a lot of movement. We have a let me close this. Nuclear Energy Agency. We have, and this is a sort of more recent development, the Directorate for Science and Technology and Industry. We're doing work on nanotechnology, biotechnology, all kinds of research. Then we don't give anybody any money, but our members do. So the United States is the biggest donor of aid in the world. But the OECD looks at where the United States is giving money and how it's being spent and reports in this organization called the Development Cooperation Directorate, and we do something called aid effectiveness and respond to it. It's a good idea if you have any desire to work at the OECD to just go to that site and upload your resume. It will hold it there so that anytime a job comes, you won't have to, you might go in and spruce up your cover letter a little bit or add some experience, but you won't have to go through the whole process again. Some interesting thing, let's talk about internships. 130 staff currently, and these numbers are about 10 months old, so who knows, there may be more now, were previously interns. If international policy is your thing, this is a pretty cool place to work.